Okay, it looks like maybe we've got a critical mass here today. Welcome, everyone, to our new series for our National ACT virtual meetups. I'm Maria Monroe DeVita, and we'll do some more intros here in just a minute. Before we get started, we just wanted to orient everyone, especially if you're new to our group, to our typical agenda. We typically kind of follow this similar format every time we meet. We'll do some brief intros, introduce our special topic today. We're really excited to have Bette Stewart from University of Maryland with us to talk about the role of families and natural supports on mitigating loneliness and other negative outcomes. And then we'll turn our attention to hearing from you. We want to know what your questions are, if you want to compare notes on certain things happening in your state or within your team. Now or then, I should say, is the time to do it. We usually try to reserve about 20 to 30 minutes the last half of the call to focus on that. And then just a reminder that we meet every other month. So our next meeting is going to be on Monday, December 4th. And at our next one, I'm going to be talking a bit about using the ACT comprehensive assessment to build engagement and understanding of the people that we work with within our ACT teams. So just a quick bit of housekeeping. Few things. You are all muted, as is typical in something like this where we have a larger audience. And so you're not appearing on video right now. The chat box and the QA box will be available for your use, and I'll explain in a second how we'll kind of distinguish between the two of those. The presentation is being recorded. It will be available to you on our website after today's presentation, along with the slides. And if you've got like a comment you want to make, or just want to respond to like a question that we pose within the presentation or on the call, you can use the chat for that. But if you want a question to be answered, you have a targeted question to be answered, instead of using that chat, we'd like you to put it in the Q&A box. That allows us to be able to handle those questions, make sure that they're answered. We can both answer live as well as type in our responses there, and it just helps us to kind of track things a little better. Sometimes the chat gets a little long and it's hard to kind of keep track of the last question that was asked and where we're at with the answers. So please do that when we get to that point. And if you've got questions for Bette when she presents here in a little bit, it's good to put those questions there. Then at the end of today, again, the last 20 or 30 minutes or so, we'll have something called open mic. It'll be kind of during that last little bit, you can raise your hand and we will unmute you, and then you will have to unmute on your end. But it's nice to hear voices and hear folks kind of posing their questions live if possible. But you can also use the Q&A box to pose any questions to one another or make any comments to one another there. So without further ado, as I mentioned, I'm Maria Monroe DeVita. I'm with the University of Washington. We run the Spirit Lab here at UW, where we train and consult to about 22 ACT teams statewide here. And I've also done a lot of training and consultation across the country. I know several of you actually through that mechanism. And I'm also a co-author of the TMAC, the Tool for Measurement of ACT Fidelity Tool. And this is brought to you by the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, along with and in collaboration with Lorna's group at the UNC Center for Excellence in Community Mental Health and the Institute for Best Practices. So I will have her introduce herself from here.
Yeah, hi everyone. So thankfully, Maria and I share similar enough resumes that I can just come in with a big ditto. But primarily doing a lot of support here with my team of providers in North Carolina, but by extension, our neighboring states as well. Many of the providers we get to work closely with. So I'm really excited to have Bette here. So
great. And so with that, we are going to transition over to introducing Bette. So what I'm going to do is unshare my slides, and I'm going to bring up Bette's slides, and Lorna, you're going to take over introducing her. Okay, great.
Yeah. So first off, Bette is a longtime friend, colleague that we don't get to talk enough. And so it's unfortunate it takes matters like this saying, Bette, can you help us? This is an important topic. And she often is very obliged to say yes. So I first met Bette, I believe, in your role as a consultant and trainer with University of Maryland's EBP Center, but we were closely almost touching each other because she's done a lot of consultation and training before that. And one of the things is that she was with one of the very first PAC teams in Maryland that was a grant-funded team to kick off ACT. Lisa Dixon, a lot of big names were associated with that team. And Bette created this new position called the Family Outreach Coordinator, a position that we don't see. I think it is not something that got reified and PACT. We see it with you New York teams. You actually have policy that kind of says this could be an option on the team. And we would love to encourage more and more emphasis because this is a part of the work that gets missed too much. Background, Bette, this is personal for her, that in the 1980s, she had to advocate and fight for good care for her husband, who was re-experiencing schizoaffective disorder symptoms and really just had to go through managing life with all the things that come with life as you have a loved one with a serious mental illness, and got attached to her local NAMI, and then not surprisingly became the director of the local NAMI for a solid 7 years. So she comes with a pretty powerful resume that I think it's great for us to all put our listening ears on and take in what she's going to share. So thanks for being here, Bette.
Well, thank you. When I put it on my calendar for October 2nd, I certainly didn't think it was going to be me, but I'm glad I'm here. So yes.
Welcome.
So I started working with families on the very first ACT team in Maryland, and that was in 1990, long time ago. And my job was to specifically work with families. The problem was that all of our clients were homeless. And so people would say to me, well, who are you going to work with? They're homeless people. They don't have families. And so I was a little bit anxious, and I said, well, I'm sure the families are out there. Well, sure enough, because it's a research university, there was a study done, and it looked to see what percentage of people who were homeless on our team actually had family, contact. Now that contact could have been once a month, once a week, it could have been just, hi, how are you kind of things. But we found out that 73% of the people who were being served actually had ongoing contact with their families. Now, it's not much because we only had 67 people on our team in the beginning, but we had 49 people who had contact with their families. So of those 49 families, we worked with 61% of them. I didn't do all of the work with them. I really focused in on about 20 of the families. And there are some amazing stories. If we have time at the end, I can share something like that. But I just think that, my experience on the team was wonderful. I was there for 12 years, and then I was asked to come over to the University of Maryland to be their consultant trainer on ACT services, which, once again, I didn't think I could do that, but I did it. And so here I am today. And as to what Lorna said about not having a family representative on the team, I'm sorry I didn't do more to really, push for that, because I think that that's a vital role. And I'm sure you will agree when we get finished talking about families that if you had one person who could handle things, it would be much better. Okay, great, thanks. So our next slide is, do we have the next slide?
We do. Hold on. For some reason, it's not.
Okay, so the next slide is basically some learning objectives, and hopefully you will be able to come away with this and learn some things. So
let me try this again.
Okay.
Hold on.
Yes, Katie.
There we go.
Who took my position when I retired, just said, yes, New York expects this to be happening in their state. So anyway, I want you to be thinking about the people in your life that you are very close to, people that you would go to if you had an issue or a problem or a concern, someone that cares about you, someone that loves you, someone that really has your back. Okay, so think about how many people you have in your life that meet that criteria. And now I want you to think about some of the folks you work with and think about their network of support. How many people do they have in their little circle to help them and support them get through life? I mean, so I just want you to think about that. And I think the average number of people, I believe, I've read so many things, I can't remember. I believe it's like 8 to 10 people have in their lives that are just really the person you can go to, okay? So again, we're going to be looking at the people you're working with and talking about them. Okay, next. My favorite picture. Oh. Okay, so this is not my family. This is a family. And I want to talk about, where it started. So we are social animals, and our brains are just wired to be connected. Our, when we're not connected, our physical and mental health is impacted. So as far back as the beginning of humans, lives depended on the support and protection from their immediate and extended families. Threats were all around, and it would have been deadly to let down their guard and sleep if there wasn't someone there to guard their back. So likewise, it would have been difficult to hunt and gather without additional supports. So family is determined by the individual as someone providing that support, caring, love, protection from danger, someone who really has your back. So who do we turn to, and who do ACT clients turn to? Well, just imagine the stress of not having a relationship with a person that can help you when you're faced with some pretty big challenges. So we know some ACT clients live with their families, and some enjoy that support automatically. Some people live with their families and maybe not so well, but we know that it is possible to build burned bridges and to reach back out to those families to help include them as natural supports in the person's life. So over time, due to symptoms, misunderstanding about mental illnesses, misinterpretations of interactions, fear, burden, and stigma, ACT clients have a much smaller number of natural supports that they can rely on. Okay, next. So I'm really big on the pictures this time around. So this is our Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy. And I don't know, there's been a lot of talk recently about loneliness. And I mean, I've heard it on the radio, I've read it in newspapers. There's just a lot of evidence and talk about loneliness and the role it plays in our lives. But it's not new, because as I was doing some research, loneliness was worked on way back in the 1980s and 90s. So this is not a new thing, but now they're looking at this much more seriously. So in this report, and if you get a chance to read it, it's an interesting report. So we're looking at the physical health consequences of poor or insufficient connection. So these are some of the things. Now this is based on the general public. 29% increase risk of heart disease when you're not connected. 32% increased risk of stroke, and a 50% increased risk of developing dementia or Alzheimer's disease. So lacking social connection increases the risk of premature death by more than 60%. That's a lot. So all of these statistics came from this report. It's pointed out that individuals with poor physical and mental health and co-occurring disorders are twice as likely to be disconnected from their natural supports. So how does this apply to your work with clients? Well, let's take a look at the additional challenges faced by someone with a mental illness. Okay, so as you see at the top, premature death of individuals with mental illness. So the average lifespan in America today is 76.4 years. And that means that persons with mental illnesses are dying in their late 40s, 50s, early 60s. It's not uncommon. In the Surgeon General's report, along with other research, they describe a plethora of possible reasons. And as you can see up here, there's a long list of things. I didn't want to overwhelm people, but I'm sure that many of these things look familiar with the individuals that you work with. The one that you may not be as familiar with is the limited family and social resources. So what we know is that when people who care about are involved with someone, it's more likely that they can support better health practices, provide additional emotional and practical supports to that person, such as taking people to appointments, identifying physical health symptoms before they become terminal or untreatable, and be there when the times get tough. Families can provide housing, financial support, and most of all, connect on an emotional level with their family member. And they can be a positive resource, not only for the client, but for the providers as well. And what we find is that when families are connected or reconnected, that it benefits the family itself. Families can be a source when they understand mental illness and when they're heard by the providers, and when they receive the support that they need so that they in turn can support their family member. Next. Okay, so I looked at morbidity and mortality, and again, the rates of mortality for individuals with serious mental illness is much higher. So many clients that are served by ACT teams have serious physical illnesses, along with their mental illnesses. So chronic inflammation is associated with cardiac diseases, diabetes, malignancies, autoimmune diseases, chronic hepatitic and renal disabilities. Stress hormones, poor nutrition, sleep hygiene, smoking, alcohol, and loneliness cause inflammation. So it's this rippling effect. It's not just one thing or another thing. It's a whole lot of things. So let's take a look at what loneliness really is. So many times people use isolation and loneliness as the same thing, but it's really very different. And what's different about it is that, and I have to look at my note because I have no memory, but when something is objective, it's just factual information. It's like the cake has 250 calories in it. The difference between that and subjective is, oh, that cake is really good. It's a feeling. Okay. So we're looking at loneliness. I mean, social isolation can lead to loneliness, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are lonely if they're isolated. People can be isolated and still feel connected to people. And the thing with loneliness is it depends on each person. So do I feel like my needs are being met? And if I don't feel that, then it just makes it, more difficult to get that support. I want to see. So some people, and you can be surrounded by people and still be very lonely. So it's a little tricky, and so again, just keep in mind loneliness and social isolation are two different things. So so when we experience hunger, thirst, pain, those are subjective feelings, but those are more easily recognized and addressed. So cognition can impair individuals, suspiciousness can be heightened, and behaviors can be such that families just don't know how to cope with what's going on, or they might be afraid. So people with mental illnesses are more likely to perceive ambiguous cues negatively and enter a self-preservation mindset when actually pushes them away from the connections that they're seeking. So what do we do if we're lonely? It's really difficult to ask for help many times if you don't have a large group of people to call on. But what do we do if we're lonely? With each episode of illness, the circle of support gets smaller and smaller. Friends drift away. They move forward in their lives, but the person with a mental illness sort of stays stuck or is behind where they are. Family members don't know how to help or have the coping skills necessary to support their family member. Okay, next. So Okay, so this is where I want to talk a little bit about families. And so family is the most likely group to have the person's back and the most logical place to begin building social connections. Even if they're burned bridges, bad mojo, or just fear of reconnecting by the client and or the family. In many of the papers that I've been reading to prepare for this, it's so amazing to me when they say in these documents, oh, family is very important. However, if you want to help connect people, you can take them to a library or the YMCA, or get them involved in an activity or a volunteer job, or let them join a book club. And I'm thinking, we've got families right there. They're free. You don't have, it just takes a little bit of effort to engage those families. And I'm here to say that I did this for a long, long time, and it is doable, and it is amazing to see the changes. So off my soapbox. So by the time a person is connected to an ACT team, there's so much that's gone on in their lives. They've damaged relationships. People get angry. They lose their adaptive energy, and they feel hopeless. They experience courtesy stigma, and they have severe feelings of shame and guilt. We're talking about the families. So when I say adaptive energy, what that is when something happens in a crisis or someone gets ill, we can rise to the occasion and we can keep doing it. However, we can't do it forever. So we get to a point where we go, oh, this is too much. And then we stop. So that's that, I just love that, that term, adaptive energy. And that was coined by the father of stress research, Hans Selye. Anyway, so we're able to adapt and crank up our energy, but again, it wears out. And think about the families. They might have been going through bad experiences and struggles for a long, long time. Also, courtesy stigma. I'm not sure if you all know what that is, but that is secondary stigma that comes as a result of associating with a stigmatized portion of society. So families also carry that badge of, courtesy stigma. So keep that in mind too. So shame and guilt also play in, especially on the families. And shame in that this happened, what could they have done differently? And guilt that they know somehow, somewhere they did something wrong, whether they did or they didn't do something that caused this. So we know lots of folks that you're working with do have contact with families, and I would certainly encourage you to work with those families first. Even when families have experienced mental illness, again, they may not understand why their family member does what they do. Okay, all righty, next. So I like the quote at the bottom, the only thing worse than suffering a serious illness is suffering it alone. So how do we begin to help people build that support network that's so important? And what do we need to know about families to engage them in the first place? Next. Well, this is what we know through research. Families may have no prior knowledge of behavioral health symptoms. We know that even if the client is in his 50s and that family has been there for them or managing for 30 years, does not mean that they understand mental illness or that they understand it as an illness. It's amazing how many people just don't understand. They may misinterpret symptoms as being willful. Just look at my notes. So also it's important that I say this, that is that about families, the research shows that working with families is not the same as treating families. So there's no conflict in what you're doing with the folks you're working with and helping their families. You are really helping your clients when you work with your families, because you're preparing those families for the long haul so that they have some adaptive energy in their lives. So they can connect with the individual. and they can connect that individual to other caring family members. You know, many times families do not share information about what's going on with their family member, again, due to that stigma, the shame, all of those things. But once somebody in the family understands and they share that information, it helps to diminish some of that stigma. But it also helps to connect those people back to someone where those ties have been disconnected. So families do come to the table with varying needs. Some people are very knowledgeable about mental illness, but maybe not about co-occurring disorders. And they may come without skills. And so it takes teaching someone something. You just can't automatically know it. People don't know how to necessarily work with a person who has a mental illness. I mean, yelling at them doesn't help. You know, they're not going, if you scream at them or you push them or whatever, as families often do, because they don't understand. Just the simple thing of explaining to families that, hey, if your family member suddenly lost their hearing, yelling at them is not going to get them to hear you. You have to learn a new way to communicate. And communication is such an important piece of all of this. Anyway, I don't think I need to go on and on and on about this. I would like to, but I won't. But let's see. And then also keep in mind that by the time somebody gets to an ACT team, you are not the first group of people that they've worked with. They may have been through all kinds of different agencies, all kinds of different programs. So, you know, it's very hard to know what their previous experience has been. And I think one of the very first things that staff can ask a family is, what's this been like for you? What's the experience been? Because many people are burned by the very system that's supposed to be helping and supporting them. And there's a lot of, I guess, a feeling of disrespect for what families can bring to the table. So let's see, what other things? So in order to really engage these families, it's so important to work as a team to engage families. And we're going to talk more about why families may be difficult to engage and ways to do that. So we know that when families receive education and understand that the individual may not always have control over their behaviors, they're more likely to provide appropriate care and support. They can become a valuable part of the care team and help monitor behavior, mood changes, and also working with them with a crisis plan so that they know what to do when things fall apart. They just need that support. All right, next. So reducing loneliness through connection. So families often are careful discussing concerns, as I said earlier, and they don't share information about their ill relative with friends and family, and therefore they're not getting any kind of support. And so it's this misunderstanding of mental illness. And when they feel comfortable discussing mental illness, as I said earlier, it does break down the stigma and it helps other people to see mental illness as an illness and not just as a somebody trying to get your goat. This can broaden the network of support, not only for them, but for the clients. And also it can really help you as clinicians. And we'll talk about that. So the next slide is, these are the keys to understanding. Very, very easy, right? So empathy. So empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others. Doesn't mean you have to experience exactly what they've experienced, but you can tune into what that feeling is that they're experiencing. So to see things from their point of view, put yourself in their shoes. Families need empathy for the trauma that they've experienced of having a loved one with mental illness. Empathy for their grief, their guilt, their sadness. They need to understand mental illnesses to know to know about these illnesses, and there's nothing that they did or didn't do that brought it on. And it doesn't matter how intelligent a family is, there's always a little piece that stays in the heart that says, surely I must have done something, or I didn't do something that's brought this on. So this feeling just is constant with families. Even if the families that are arguing with you, they still have this feeling in their hearts. So you need to hear how illness has impacted their lives. So the next slide, I just couldn't resist this because I just think this is like a perfect description of empathy. Any questions so far? Okay, all righty. So next slide, hope and empathy. So families hold on to the hope. And those of you who've been trained by me know that I always talk about hope in any ACT training, and that is many times people are not ready to accept the hope. They feel hopeless. They don't feel that there'll ever be a recovery or that the person will ever be the person they knew before. So part of the job, and I hate to spring this on you, but part of your job is to hold that hope for them until they're ready to accept it. And you do that by, collaboration and working with them and trying to understand what's going on. A lot of times it looks like families aren't interested, but again, we have to find out why that is. It's not just, we don't know what happened. Take it from there. So families are more likely to engage with providers that can empathize with their fears and their concerns and who can share information and help them to understand things. All righty, next slide. Again, we're talking about subjective burden, and that's that emotional burden. Right? Yep. Just checking. So, so these are some quotes that family members have said, and these are actual quotes. And I think that it's you can see how mental illness has impacted some family members. So, the last bullet, my sister stopped visiting, and even now will not go to visit my mother at the house if my brother is there. I mean, it changes the dynamics of the entire family. So it is important to understand that when you're interacting with families. Okay, next. And this is the objective burden. And that is the day-to-day stuff that people deal with. Again, issues like taking care of people. The rest of the family was not protected from my brother's behaviors. All of the things that happen within the families are things that are ongoing burdens for the families. So in a way, it's a lot like the negative and positive symptoms of psychosis. Things that should be there have been taken away and replaced by things that don't belong. So families and individuals with a mental illness experience tangible losses affecting their ability to respond in the most effective ways. And let's face it, when you are meeting with families, especially families where there's been some conflict, they may not be the most pleasant people to meet with. It could be that they have, had bad experiences with previous providers. I know when I worked on the team and contacted a family, the response after they hung up on me, and of course I didn't give up, I kept calling them because that's part of what I do. And finally the woman said to me, you know what, if you get me back involved with my brother, you're going to leave me with him, and I won't know what to do. So put an end to that right away, started helping her to understand what was going on with her brother. But she was terrified because she knew that if she got involved, we would step back, and that was not the case. Okay, next. Okay, so when you go to see families, I don't know, this is probably, these are some of the things you're going to see. Hypervigilance is for those families where the client lives at home, and usually it's mom who's talking them about something and on their case about to take your medicine, watching every move they make. And that comes from it just comes from, that fear of losing that person. All right, next. All right, so one thing that makes it difficult for providers to engage families is that it's not part of your training. We're asking you to do something that's really not part of what you've been trained to do. And it's easy to see the individual as the client, but not see how families can have a role in their relatives' recovery. So engaging with the natural supports helps to lessen family anxiety, to develop realistic expectations, and to provide guidance for managing practical issues such as limit setting and problem solving. Helping families recognize emerging symptoms and providing strategies to address moods or behaviors before they rise to the crisis level is critical to reducing stress in the house. Developing a crisis plan can be helpful to reduce involving police and hospitalizations. This may be new to families and they may not have had a clue about what's effective and what isn't. They need to learn that it doesn't come naturally. So again, we're back to empathy, and that's a large part of learning to work with families. Okay. The next slide, please. So effective family engagement leads to their ability to provide the emotional support their relative needs to live a meaningful life, helping them learn effective communication, problem solving, coping skills to better respond to their relative. And as I said, left on their own, they'll do what they think is the right thing that will work. And 9 out of 10 times, it's not very effective. Help them understand how stress can impact a fragile mind and understand that learning new ways to respond to their ill relative is not giving in. We need to learn how to communicate with them. And I confess, I violated that terribly. And the stress is a big, we know stress doesn't cause mental illness, but we know it doesn't help. And so anytime we can reduce the amount of stress that families are experiencing, we are not only helping the family, we are helping our client to do better. And again, helping families restore adaptive energy will reduce the overall stress in the household. And it also improves their own mental and physical health. And it can really positively affect the relationship that they have with their family member. And I put a little note down on my notes, and that is, as a member of NAMI, when we did the family-to-family trainings, we always said, you can't beat yourself up if you can't know what someone has not told you. So again, if people aren't saying, hey, this is an illness, families just are going to sort of take on and do it themselves and try to figure it out, which can be stressful for everybody. Relearning to communicate to someone who has a mental illness. Change is not easy for any of us, including families. And that's what we're asking families to do. We're asking you to change your thoughts and attitudes about families, but we're also asking you to help families learn to change and meet things where they are. Okay, next. Okay. So it's not all about just you. It's about your agency. It's about everybody. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. Your agency has to really believe in this. And all right, and here's my little trick. So you see the little quote at the bottom, everyone must believe the value in collaborating to see the value. And I say, you have to see it before you can believe it. You really need to see how it works before you can say, I believe this is really working. All right, so successful collaboration between individuals, families, and providers must be a team priority from the leadership down. Shifting how providers approach families can be a way to open communication leading to collaboration. So we talked earlier about perceived and real family perceptions about how families might view providers. Often the only context between providers and families remains limited to telephone calls and only during crisis times. Reaching out to families when there isn't a crisis is a small change that can affect how families perceive providers. Collaboration makes context meaningful to all of those people involved. And building trust with families, of course. They need to know that if you say you'll do something, that you actually will follow through and do something. Let's see. Okay. So I am going, next slide, please. So there were a lot of things I could have gone over, but I thought that the most important thing was to go back to something that was written in 2000 by Lisa Dixon and her group of researchers. And these are the 15 principles of working with families, and they all make a lot of sense. Ensure everyone is on the same page. Help that family know what's going on. Let them know you are working on things. What do I hear? What did I hear? What do I still hear when I go to teams? Families say, they're not doing anything about his substance use. Well, maybe they are. Or they're telling my son he doesn't have to take his medication, or my son wants to change, and they say, okay, let's talk about it. You can decide what to take. Well, for a family, that is a pretty scary kind of thing. So we need to know that people are on the same page and understand what's going on. Again, paying attention to the clinical and social needs of the client. Whoops, did I lose that?
What happened?
I don't know.
Oh, is everything okay?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Oh, okay.
Everything just went blank. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
It's not a test.
It's all good, I think.
I'm just being a very, very contrary family member. You thought I was going to tell you something, but anyway, providing optimal medication management. Listen to the family's concerns. Empathy. Explore the family members' expectations. I mean, I'm sure some of you have young people on your teams, and the expectations of the families may be way over what the person can do at this time. So helping families rein it in a little bit. Okay, next. 5 down, 10 to go. Assess strengths and limitations of the family's ability to support the person. You know, not everybody can do that. Not everybody has the patience or, I don't know, the energy to do it. I mean, many times families are comprised of one person, usually a mom. So again, take a strengths-based approach, find out what the family knows, and go from there. Listen to their emotional distressors, help them see these things are part of the illness. Address feelings of loss. Families view mental illness as kind of a death, and it's a death that just keeps going. It's a death that just keeps giving. You feel that loss of the person that was there before, and families really, in order to get better, they need to come to terms and accept that person is still the person. Things might just be different, and we have to take a different track in how we interact with them. But that loss is really severe. Provide relevant information at appropriate times. So telling a person who is yelling at you on the phone, hey, why don't you go to NAMI? They can help you. They're not going to listen to you because they're not at a point where they want to hear that. So again, it's just like anything else. I mean, they have to be at a stage where they're ready to accept the fact that the person has a mental illness and that there are things that they can do to support that person. Help improve communication among family members. We know that family members fight a lot because they're not on the same page with each other. Mom's up here and she's like, they aren't doing anything for Joe. And dad says, Joe's fine. He doesn't really have an illness. And so right there's this conflict. So that's going on inside the family too. So it's important to find out where people are, what's going on with them. Okay, next. Okay. Provide training and problem-solving techniques. Well, there is an evidence-based practice that does all these things that we've been talking about, and that is called family psychoeducation. That is the current evidence-based practice that I am a consultant for. And I would love to see it on ACT teams, as many people would like to see it on ACT teams, because we know that, when you have your fidelity checked, whether it's the DACT or the TMACT, there is an item on there that's, how are you connecting with natural supports? What is that? You need to be flexible in meeting family needs. The other thing is, of course, expanding the social network of the families. When they come together in a group, it really helps to give them the support that they need, because they're in a group with people who understand what they may be going through. They can have empathy for each other. And as a family member, I can tell you, not only does do the friends and family members shrink for the person who has the illness, it happens for the family and family members. And family members can be very lonely and isolated as a result of that stigma that's still there. Give families resources, but also don't be disappointed if they don't follow through. Many times families just don't follow through. And that could be for many reasons, but just know that you can still reach out to them and let them know that you're there. And again, that crisis plan. Families know what to do in an emergency. It just takes a lot of the stress out of the situation. I'm sorry, I couldn't read. I got distracted by reading the thing at the bottom. We can talk about that. I'm wrapping things up. Next. So basically, I can summarize everything I said today in a few bullet points, okay? The first one is, listen to what the families are saying. The second one is, you don't have to fix things. Sometimes listening with empathy is all that's needed, period. Respect where families are in their process of emotional recovery. Some may never accept the fact that their relative has a brain disorder. They may never let go of their expectations of their relative. They may never get over the fear and the anger that they have toward the person. Give them what they need at whatever stage they're in, but provide the empathy to let them see that they can move forward. And of course, never give up the hope of recovery. Okay, next. So that's my synopsis for 45 minutes. Again, it takes teamwork, it takes time, it takes empathy, understanding, and education. And it can be done. I know it can be done, and I believe it can be done. So let's just see. Well, I think that's fine. But again, it's teamwork. So there should, if you don't have one person on your team who works with families, doesn't mean you can't work with families. Anybody can work with families. It's just a matter of meeting them, observing. And I can give you a good example of how I started with one family. I walked into the apartment, looked around, saw all these photographs of somebody. I said, wow, look at all these pictures. Who are they? So the woman starts telling me all about the family members. And she was so engaged. And she was like, oh, do you want to see some more pictures? I mean, that was my foot in the door. I didn't talk about mental illness at all. I connected with her. And that was the step that just started it with that particular person. Next. Okay, this is more research that was done back to original natural supports. Please don't forget them. They are there. You may have to look for them. You may have to reach out to them. It's not a one and done. I've never met a family that really took to meeting with a provider on the first visit, but it can be done. Okay, next. Okay, my major in college was anthropology, and archaeology. So Charles Darwin, Charles Dickens. Oh, that was the English course. No, Charles Darwin. This is all about adapting, adjusting to the changes that constantly take place in our lives, whether we have a mental illness or not. Okay, last slide. So I want to thank you for listening. And now I hope people have some questions.
They do. Thank you so much, Bette. Really, really appreciate it. Such an important topic. Yes, there's been some back and forth in the chat, as well as one question in the Q&A that has started us into the Q&A portion of this. Before we get to Katie Kirk, your colleague had a question in there about who is doing family psychoeducation and support within ACT teams. But before we answer that, would you share a little more about what family psychoeducation and support is? And then Lorna, also, just for everyone to know, put a link in the chat that tells you more about it, and I think links to a manual, right, Lorna? And it's also in the SAMHSA toolkits, and I know there have been like multiple versions. But do you want to share just a little bit more about what it entails, Bette?
I do. First, I want to say, I want to put a plug in for NAMI. Yeah. Not everybody has family psychoeducation, but I would guarantee that every state has a NAMI, and they provide free education. They provide supports, so it doesn't all fall on your shoulders. But you have to engage those families before they will venture out and go to any of these programs. Family psychoeducation. Wow, I have been doing this for 35 years. I can't believe it. And when I first started doing it, I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I have learned how beneficial this is. It is a program that brings families that are identified by the client, people they want in the group, people that they would identify as meaningful people to them. And there's a group, this is a multi-family group. So it's the client and their family, whoever they identify. It could be a friend, it could be, a significant other, somebody from their biological family, it doesn't matter. And hopefully about eight families get together, and they work on problem solving. And it's a skill that needs to be developed. So, it's also learning how to identify what the problem really is. Many times people will come up with one thing, and then the more you dig, you say, oh, well, geez, maybe it's really this. What do you think? And so bringing this up to the group and saying, all right, so would you like to work on this? We can do that. So we pick this issue, everyone's in agreement, and then we ask questions. Tell me more about this. When does this happen? Why does this happen? All right, get all the information we need so that we can offer some possible solutions to their predicament. So the whole group, everybody contributes to this. There's a video, and I can send that link to Lorna. It's a 90-minute session, but we did it in 30 minutes, 33 minutes, and I talked very fast. But it really shows you how the group works. But, so then at the end, after maybe 10 or 12 possible solutions are presented, the person can choose what they would like to try over the next 2 weeks. And the important thing is that now we want to find out what supports and help do they need to complete this task, and who's going to help them, It could be something as simple as, when I ran a group on an ACT team years ago, a lot of years ago, we had a nurse in the group. And, when somebody's medications, they were due for medication and, they didn't always show up when they needed it, but the family was noticing some changes in the person. The nurse said, hey, would you like to just get your shot now so you don't have to come in tomorrow or the next day? That kind of thing. Offering things that can be done. Also saying, if someone's complaining about medication or the medication is making them too tired to go to work. Okay, maybe one of the things that we can do to help you is get in touch with a psychiatrist and say, hey, can you talk to Joe, in the next day or so and get, help him with this medication issue. We can take care of some things pretty quickly in the group, but also we want to write everything down because we know people who have a diagnosis of schizophrenia, have a hard time remembering things. And also as people get older, they have a hard time remembering things. So writing it down is very helpful, but also writing down who is going to be helpful. So on an ACT team, it might be something like, well, I want to get a job doing this, but before I could go to work, I need to get steel-toed shoes. And the mother says, I can't buy another pair of shoes for this guy. And so we say, hey, you know what? The employment specialist, we can talk to them because maybe they can do something with doors, or maybe they can come up with a way to help you get your things, your needs met. So we're trying to come up with interventions and assigning people to help support with those interventions. Groups meet. We know that a change takes place at about, a positive change takes place at about 9 months. We also know that when you combine multifamily psychoeducation with medication, it doubles the effect of the medication. And so just think, you're not there to work on the family's problem, and it's not like Joe doesn't change his socks. There's nothing like that. It's, Joe comes in and says, I just can't get to work on time because the medicine makes me sleep too much. All right, that's something we can work on. So anyway, and then at the next meeting, the person reports on how things went. Were you able to try it? Most times people say yes. And yeah, I'm surprised it really worked. I got to see the doctor and now I'm doing much better. Or they'll say, I just couldn't do it. Well, maybe you just bit off more than you could chew. And maybe we should have just, come up with some better ideas about how to do this thing. So you got a list of things because we make the list and to give it to the person. You've got a list of some of the recommendations. You can either bring it, we can meet with you on our next meeting and talk about it, see if there are ways we can help. Or if you would just like to try something on your own, you try it. I'll tell you, when I talk to families say, it is so wonderful to be in a room with people who understand what I'm experiencing, but also I'm hearing from other clients in the room what they've experienced. And it's a lot like what my son tells me, but I just think maybe that's not right. But I'm hearing it from other people. And it's also this cross-parenting that takes place. My best story was when one of the basic founders of NAMI, which was 100 years ago, her son was in the group. And so another guy was coming all the time and he wouldn't take his medication. He was psychotic all the time. His parents were in their 80s. And finally, Carol stood up and she said, oh, for God's sake, take your medicine. And he said, do you think it would work? And she said, well, you got to try it. He said, well, I think I will. And it was just somebody else saying this. And it wasn't mom telling him. He was like he'd never heard this before. And he took his medicine.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't always work, but I'm saying these are the kinds of things that come out of these groups.
And in the family psychoeducation, whether it's in your area, it's called multifamily group psychoeducation groups, which is for some of you may be more familiar with that term because of kind of where it all came from with Bill McFarland, and he was
sorry.
calling it that, and that's kind of what it's published under. But then also the evidence-based practice came out through SAMHSA called family psychoeducation and support was also added to that name. In either of those cases, would you say that it's mostly done with families with their loved one in the room?
Oh yeah,
without them in the room? Does it ever happen without them in the room, or are they always there, or they tend to be?
No, I mean, we make an exception every now and then if somebody, like a person may be in the hospital and not there, and the family comes, but we never work on a problem that's related to their family member who's ill,
Right?
Because they're not there to give the input. But it works when everybody is there, and that means whoever the family is that's been identified and the individual. And it also is a way to increase the connectedness. Families get connected to the families, and the clients who are in that room start to feel a connection to those people. And I think it's a much more effective way than saying join a book club. But that's me. But yeah, I mean, that's the model. And I keep getting some pushback from people saying, oh, but the families just want support. They'd rather meet without their family member. And I was like, well, there are support groups out in the community. This is a therapeutic intervention. It's not therapy, but it's just as important as any other clinical intervention that you're going to be receiving. And again, I know in Maryland, in order to bill for this service, one must be a clinician. The group is run by 2 staff people who know the clients. Okay, you have to know the clients because you have to know what's going on with them so that you can you can talk about it in your private sessions and say, hey, you might want to bring this up in the group because I know 2 other people have this same issue.
Right.
Yeah.
Bette, we're noticing online the family psychoeducation in support is not. We can't find it anywhere.
I can't find it. I know. I didn't want to say that in case. I didn't want to say that right off the bat.
Yeah. Can you?
Family member telling you what, but I haven't been able to find it either.
Oh, weird. Okay.
And then the next question is, are people doing it on ACT teams?
Yeah. So, what are people's experiences? Are you doing family education, psychoeducation?
Am I doing it with?
Well, you can answer too, because what are you seeing?
Well, let me just say, I'm doing it on early intervention teams, and it seems to be going well. I tried it on an ACT team, and it went really, really well. And that was an ACT team that Katie Kirk was the team leader, and she's like, yes, we're going to do this. And the group fell apart because one of the members died. 2 members got jobs that conflicted with things. Somebody else was moved out of the program, and somebody else wouldn't leave their house. So, it worked when they were doing it. I think people think it's just something extra to do. It's not an extra add-on, a maybe kind of thing. It's really part of the treatment. It is.
Yeah. And it looks like, Ashley, thank you very much. It sounds like you may have found it and it was buried in the EVP toolkit, which is where some of us were looking for it.
Where? Well, gosh, please send it out.
Yes. So if you guys go up in the chat, it's just a little bit up from, there's 2 Ashleys. Ashley W. is the person who put it in. Thank you so much. And then Ashley Anderson, thank you so much. You provide psychoeducation during the family support group without a curriculum. Bette, is the version that you use with early intervention programs the one from On Track New York? Because there's a family education manual for first episode teams that On Track New York has, and it's the same curriculum. I was going to put that in the chat just if we couldn't find it.
I mean, no, I have just been using the William McFarland model, and it seems to be fine.
Okay, great. And then we also had a comment about CRAFT, which is another model that can be used by families mostly focused on substance use disorders and includes motivational interviewing and enhancement therapy and some, it's a mix of some contingency management or community reinforcement type work. Were you going to say
And
something
again,
else, Betty?
And that requires a clinician. The nice thing about this is you don't have to be a clinician unless you're worried
Right.
about billing for the services.
Yeah.
I ran a group with, gosh, I mean, I've run it with psychiatrists, I've run it with nurses, I've run it with peers. You know, I mean, it's not therapy. I mean, we're just listening. We're teaching families how to problem solve and how to reduce that stress that they're feeling when they don't know what to do or how to do it.
We got a question. Do we or should we expect families to provide any support to the client, like helping them to take their meds?
Well, should you expect that? Well, again, you have to work on that with the families. You have to reconnect. You have to help them understand the value of the medications. You have to help them understand that it is an illness. I mean, there are a lot of families. I just bumped into a family that, you know, was afraid that their daughter would become addicted to clozapine and wanted her to be taken off of it. And it was the only medication that's been working. And so again, education, helping families to have some strategies for how to encourage the person to take medicine without telling them take this medicine, you know, helping them learn more about motivational interviewing. There's a great little film that Amador has on, and it's like 3 minutes, and it's just on the difference, how using motivational interviewing can change the response that a family member gets from their relative.
Yeah, I think that's a good you're pointing to a great model too that can be used. I mean, I feel like we're giving people tools, right? So you mentioned family to family and what NAMI provides. There's family psychoeducation and support. There's craft if there's particularly around substance use disorders. What you described as LEAP, which is the LEAP model, which really helps for if your family member is having some challenges around insight and understanding whether they do or don't experience a mental health condition. And the idea is you don't have to have insight in order to really help the person. You can build insight, or you can build at least the relationship, and teaching families that. So I'll put the link to what you just described, actually.
Yeah, I mean, and Dr. Amador talks about anosognosia and talks about it's not so much lacking insight as it is the part of the brain just is like, no, there's nothing wrong with me. And I mean, people see that in other physical illnesses where that kind of thing happens, where people just don't see that they've got an issue. But yeah, I mean, and his book is really good to read if you have a family whose family member just simply says, I don't have a mental illness. I'm not taking my medication. I'm not going to do this.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing that families just cannot wrap their heads around that.
The other thing I wanted to add, just while we're talking about a range of different tools for teams to be able to use and for teams to be able to tell your families about, and that is one about, I guess it's been 8 months ago, Sarah Kapelovich from our team at University of Washington was on here talking about Psychosis Reach, which is a family intervention to teach families basically CBT informed skills. So you're not teaching families to be junior clinicians, but it's kind of adding one more set of tools to the toolbox for families to just be able to better communicate with their loved one. And so you're teaching these kind of soft CBT skills to families, and then there's a mix of CBT informed skills as well as teaching families more about just psychoeducation and kind of the latest of what we know about psychosis, in particular, thinking about schizophrenia spectrum disorders in particular, I should say, and then also self-care for families, which is huge, and obviously a neglected area, I think, for families. So I will put that in the chat too, so that you guys can see her talk from before.
And NAMI, their family to family education program covers all of those things also. And it is one of the programs that really focuses on helping families to to learn ways to take care of themselves. And in the process, they're teaching communication skills and all kinds of other things. So if you can tap into a family to family class, and I think they're good. They've adjusted. It is an evidence-based practice, or it was, but they've now condensed it to eight weeks instead of 12, which I'm old fashioned. I kind of like 12 weeks because it gives you a chance to really connect with people. But, look into it. Okay.
We had another question. Do you find that clients themselves are resistant or ambivalent to engaging their families? In those cases, are there recommended steps to move forward from there?
Oh yeah, the first time I brought it up with folks on an ACT team, they were like, I don't want my family involved. And so I got, I figured out, well, okay, so what is it that you don't want to talk about? Well, I don't want to be talking about my substance use. Okay, we don't have to talk about that. I'll write that in the notes. We won't talk about that when I meet with your family and talk with your family. And the best thing is the word of mouth. And that's what happened when I was on the ACT team with all these homeless people, and clients were coming in and they said, hey, have you gone to her group? You know what? My parents took me out to dinner before we went to the group. And somebody else said, and my family got me a pack of cigarettes. I mean, they were like, we're getting these things and my family, and basically I said, do you want to get your family off your back? Why do you think it is that they're nagging you? Do you think they understand what you're experiencing? No. A lot of times I talked about my own experience and, the dead ends that I got into. And they were like, well, sure, you can talk to her. So again, it's just finding out what they're comfortable with. We're not going to be talking about personal issues that you need to talk with your therapist about. We're going to be talking about practical things that are illness related that get in your way and prevent you from doing the things you want to do.
Thank you, Bette. I think the other just thing I was going to mention, because we were talking about the context of within an ACT team, and two things. One is that the Team ACT, when we look at family psychoeducation and support, or just the role of families and natural supports and ACT teams, we look at two things. One is just how often you're working with families, but the second is really more of a quality check in terms of what kinds of services would be expected within a team. And so, just for those of you who aren't familiar with the Team Act, so the first area is just, does the team routinely offer education to families and natural supports about their loved one's illness? The second is, are they teaching skills to family members to better kind of work with and help their loved one? And so that could be family psychoeducation and support could offer that. NAMI could offer some of that. Psychosis Reach, there's a number of these different kind of resources that we mentioned that would kind of meet sort of the intention of that one. And then the third area is, are you connecting families to support in the community, whether you're providing it yourselves and you're doing your own family psychoeducation and support group, like what some of these teams are doing with offering this particular intervention, or connecting them to NAMI or other support groups in the community. So those are kind of the three areas. And again, even though there isn't in a lot of states outside of New York, a lot of states don't typically have a family specialist on the ACT team. The idea is that, can you designate someone? I think we really, suggest that you find somebody on the team. Often, there's somebody who has interest in working with families or has experience with working with families, and they kind of spearhead that. And it's not to say that other team members aren't working with families too, but it's, again, kind of in the service of just having some specialization within ACT and having somebody who's kind of, meant to sort of be designated to sort of wear the hat or wave the flag. So if there's somebody on your team that can kind of jump in and sort of become your natural kind of expert within the team to work with families.
Well, just for your information, I mean, Lisa Dixon was the medical director on the team where I was. And so it's nice. It's wonderful to know that she's carried this forward, that it is something that's really valuable.
Thank you. Is there anything else from folks before we shift over to our remaining time on open mic? Looks like we're good. Okay. Well, you got some thank yous. You were getting lots of love on here, Bette. So we really appreciate you taking the time to
Well,
to
thank
meet
you.
with all of us today. And feel free to stay on. We've just got about a little more than, 10 minutes here. But let's use our remaining time just as folks have questions, whether you want to post to the group in the Q&A or raise your hand. This is often our time to kind of bring together 80 or so of us in one place to be able to ask a question live. So please feel free. Okay, Amanda, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to unmute you here just a second. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just was trying to give a reaction. I did not mean to
Oh.
raise my hand. I was trying to give a heart.
Good to talk to you.
Yes, you too. I
Amanda's one
really
of
appreciate.
ours.
Yes, I
Okay.
really appreciate the presentation. It's really been wonderful. We've got a lot of, since I'm unmuted, I'll take the
Yeah.
time. We've had a lot of challenging families, challenging conflicts in our family systems over here in Washington. And so having some of these opportunities to kind of normalize the experience and think about those 15 principles when working with families is really huge and a great reinforcer for us. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. See you soon.
Yeah, families are not always easy, but those are the ones, to me, the challenging families are the ones that benefit the most. The ones you think are least likely to get it are the ones that need it, and the ones who actually, learn.
Yeah.
So,
Other questions? Now's your time. Any challenges you're experiencing right now you want to compare notes with other teams on? Or questions about structure or kind of how people are handling certain things? Okay, Jane, Janae, do you want me to unmute you here? Let's see. Let me find your information here. 1 second. Okay, you're on.
So I have a lot of different family dynamics going on with my acting clients.
Mhm.
And I'm balancing some, and then I do have a family that is kind of like providing me that security of wanting to make a group actually happen for my acting clients. However, due to a lot of challenges that we see with one when both of my client and their natural support are both dealing with co-occurring disorders.
Mhm.
Both is getting, some form of treatment and the other is not. So I'm having struggles between trying to build a positive communication with them along with trying to assist them work together for my clients better half of being able to deal with their own mental health. So I was wondering if there's any advice or anything that could help me continue help them mend that, because we have that challenge that takes place a lot within that family, immediate family. I hope that was understanding.
Yeah. I get asked the question a lot of times, well, what about the family? The family member might have a mental illness or a substance use, a co-occurring disorder. And how do we handle that? Well, it's a real life situation. And making it clear, it's not appropriate to come to the group, for the family to come to the group impaired. But I mean, I've had people who were parents who were substance users who didn't use while they were participating in the group. I mean, they're people and their family. And some of us have family members that, do stuff that's that we wouldn't, or I wouldn't do, but we have family members that do it. So, again, it just depends on how you can connect with that person and, building that relationship with him or with the person, the parent.
Okay. Because I've been trying and I have a decent relationship with her, but she's not ready to accept getting the help that, even though not only I, as her child's therapy, but from her own primary care. So it's just been trying. So I just keep being a listening ear when she gets it. But I was wondering, would it be beneficial if I add her or go ahead and form this group and just have her just sit there and listen so she can see that she's not the only parent having these struggles that may be existing?
I mean, it's worth a try. It's worth a try. And, we know that through research that families who are going through struggles like this frequently turn to alcohol because it can be very, very, very difficult. And if you've got a family member who acts out, or I don't know what the PC term is, loses his crap. I don't know, but these people are hard to live with. I mean, they really are hard to live with. And if you don't want to put your kid out on the street and all this stuff, so I don't know. I just see people as people.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, and I would just say, just sit there. I mean, she could certainly participate. And if she's impaired, you might say something at the end. It's like, I hope you were able to take in some of the information, I wouldn't, she's not your client.
Yeah.
And people come the way they are. And, if I could fix everybody.
Yeah. I know sometimes teams will establish some like ground rules about their groups and, not just, with anyone coming to a group,
Sure.
kind of say,
Sure.
here are some of our assumptions, or here are some of our, making it like really clear. And it doesn't have to point anybody out. You can be
Right.
ahead of time, like, hey, before you come, kind of here's what we're, here's sort of our assumptions when you show up, kind of thing. I mean, I think that can kind of also just orient and help it to not be a situation that then feels like if you did have to do something in the meeting to, if things get out of hand or whatever, you just sometimes that is an unpredictable situation, right? So
I mean, sometimes, you have to ask. I've never had to do it, but I mean, I imagine that you could have to ask people to leave.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing. I mean, if you have clients that are coming in who are impaired by alcohol or drugs, as long as they aren't creating an issue, I mean, that's part of what's going on. I mean, it's life.
It can be, yeah.
You can't pick and choose.
Thank you.
Any
Thank
thoughts
you.
over to Maria on that? Well, thank you, Jane, for bringing that up.
Yeah. Let's see here. We also have Ashley who has a question. I know we don't have a ton of time, but let's go ahead and go for it, Ashley.
I was just wondering, I asked that question in the chat, but as far as families go, and I guess to expand on the question, is there some expectation that family members should have, I guess, some responsibility in a patient's recovery, right? So like, let's say that your client is living with their parents, and I mean, we have this on the team where some of our team members expect that, if we don't, that why are we going every day to watch the client take the meds? Why aren't the parents doing that? They're living in the basement. Like, is that the I mean, I feel like that isn't a normal parent-child relationship.
Probably not. But maybe it's that the family doesn't believe in medications. Maybe they say, look, he's an adult, he could take care of himself. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons that families do that, but engaging that family, hey, we know this medication does X, Y, and Z, or have you seen a difference when he takes this medication? Or, how can we support his taking it and help the family say, well, maybe all you have to do is just put it in a med box, or we'll bring the med box in and you can just check and see if he takes it, or remind him, that kind of thing. Again, when I said earlier about taking people to doctor's appointments, you can call on families to do things. And when there is a connection, families will do things they can. I'm not saying everything goes back on the family, but we want people to be as independent as possible and not relying on staff to do everything. If the person is not able to take their medications on their own and they need some coaching or support, work with the family. Say, hey, would you be willing to do this? We'll help you. We'll show you how to do it. We'll show you how to do this. You know, we'll help you. We'll walk you through it. I mean, the reality is, like it or not, families are in it for the long haul. And whether it's a good relationship or a bad relationship. And anytime families can do a tangible thing that's helpful, that's a step in the right direction. I don't.
I think I was thinking too, Betty, like part of it too is exploring what's the dynamic between the family and their loved one around medications, because we all know medications become the hot topic for some people.
Sure.
And, you know, if families have been on the other side of things where they're like, you need to take the pink pill, and they're trying to say the pink pill makes me feel XYZ, and you're not understanding how awful this makes me feel, then a whole other dynamic shows up too, where meds represent something else, and taking the family out of it preserves that relationship. So I think what I'm hearing a lot from Betty too is just, we have to explore, not make a lot of assumptions, try to understand those dynamics, and work with people around the communication aspect of things too. And I liked what you said too earlier, Betty, that I wanted to pin this one on this point, is that families too are scared of, if I keep being asked to do the things you're doing, are you going to leave us?
Right.
And exploring that dynamic too.
Yeah, I mean, there's a real fear there.
Yeah.
Sandra, were you going to say something related to this?
Somewhat. I mean, it's about medications because,
Okay.
I mean, obviously we know that, yeah, consumers constantly refuse, say they don't need the medications and all that stuff. And then the families call expecting us to like force them to do it. You know, we have to always explain like, hey, we can't make them. It's, you know, despite them even being on court orders, it's still their right. Like we can't force them. And then it's, you hear me still? I don't know what's going on. Oh,
Sorry about that. That was my bad.
oh, I was like,
Keep going. I know we're a little over, but keep
calling
going.
in, but the family's refusing to sign any kind of releases of information. So we can't even really consult with the family. So we're just getting the reports of the behaviors and them making threats and all these things like that. And it's like, if you can't even engage with the family or the outside supportive services, how really then can you, rely on any other, alternatives if the only person you can talk to is the consumer and they're refusing to take medications? And then, I mean, like our most recent situation, it was kind of like they were just increasingly elevating their symptoms because, clearly not taking their meds, and the family's looking at us to do something. And then now this person ends up going to jail for assault with intent to murder because it's like, so, and then we do feel some responsibility, but then it's like, well, we don't, because we've done our interventions. However, we've done non-compliance orders and we've done all those things, but it just feels helpless in a way because we haven't been able to interact with the family. And perhaps maybe if we could have, it may have been differently, but I don't know. So just in those situations, it kind of feels like, what do you do and who's responsible and how can you really help the situation?
But again, I think it's talking to the individual and letting them know the benefits of having you help their family understand what they're experiencing. It's never 100% going to work, but trying. And I don't know, do you use shared decision making? I mean, people, the pros or cons, like what happens if you stop taking your medicine? What's going to happen? Looking at these things rather than saying just take your medicine, that it's not attached to anything else. I don't
think
know.
Each situation is it's individualized, right? And so really making sure that we're not creating like a dynamic that is more challenging. And I think Pat Deegan has some great tools related to shared decision making that can be, I think, utilized either by the team or with the team and the family and the client that you're serving, that I think could help a lot with that kind of conversation. And she just provides kind of a framework in having these discussions, because I do think it feels a little like there's just a lot going on there that is really hard. And the description you just had there, that not something that we would want to reinforce. And so I will quickly put that in the chat. We do have to close out today's session, but I want to make sure that we're also putting closure on this topic. So I'll put that in the chat before we close out the webinar. Go ahead, Betty, you were going to say something.
No, no, I'm fine.
Okay. Was there anything else related to that, though, that we can help with in making sure that you're getting your answers to some of your questions here?
And I put my email address on the slides, and, you know, feel free to, you know, reach out.
Okay, I'm going to put this in the chat real quick before we close everything out here and we have people leave. So this is Pat Deegan's Recovery Oriented Practice Series. And if you go, the first two sessions are great. She has, again, just I think a ton of areas of expertise that helped us to kind of navigate some really sticky situations. But sessions 3 and 4 talk about medications and the typical challenges that people experience in taking medications that I think should be like required training for every provider, especially for psychiatrists and nurse practitioners and other prescribers. And so I'd recommend, you know, take a look at that. There's a lot there that I think can be helpful in some of these conversations related to families too. So
and there may be real reasons why a person's not wanting to take the medication, you know?
Absolutely.
So
yep. 100%.
Listening, empathy.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Thank you, ladies.
All right, you guys. Thank you so much.
Everybody who joined.
Appreciate for the 57 or so of you that stayed on for 5 extra minutes. And we will see you again. Remember, it's every other month here. So we'll meet again in December 4th. And we'll look forward to seeing you then.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.